Hi, everyone. My name is Mohanned Abbas, and I'm from Freshbooks. So today I'm going to talk about a subject that it's very personal to me because it's basically what I've gone through as engineering lead at Freshbooks, and really talk about what I learned from being in such a position. So my job basically started as a developer who stepped into management, which was 5 or 6 years ago, the most obvious chain of events that would happen. You're a developer, you become a team lead, and suddenly you're a manager. It's not really the most attractive thing, but that was like the most obvious path that you would take. And my experience basically was purely starting as a developer. My focus has always been being a developer. So when I started, you can see that I started as developer at BlackBerry, and that was actually my internship from university. But I stayed there for about 16 months, so it almost felt like a full-time job for a while. I actually had more seniority than some of the people that started at BlackBerry, which was really funny. But I gained a lot of experience from there, and I also got to understand a couple of things, which was the IC role, as Colin has spoke about, versus the management role, which was, in the mid-2010s was the thought. Like, if you want to go into leadership, you become a manager. But at the time, a lot of the big companies started distinguishing between the IC role and management. After I graduated university, I actually started working at a company called xe.com. You probably have seen it. It's the exchange rate app. It's fairly popular. I started as the backend developer in xe.com. And then by the time I left xe.com, I became a senior developer. That was about 2 years in my senior development years. After that, I moved to a video analytics company called Vidyard. It's not in the list here, but I spent about a year there, and then I took an opportunity with an interesting startup called Imagine. Imagine got acquired by a bigger company called Innovize, and then Innovize got acquired by a bigger company called Autodesk, you probably know about. And from Imagine, in Imagine I became a team lead, and then in Innovize I became a technical manager. Then I moved on to another startup called ShipperBee. I had the startup bug. I really liked startups. You always feel like you can do a lot of impacts in smaller companies, and it does feel like it. So I moved on to ShipperBee, and that was a really interesting experience. But after ShipperBee got acquired by Purelator, again, another company got acquired by a bigger one, I moved on to Freshbooks, and that's where I actually changed my path from being a technical manager to engineering lead, which is something what Colin also mentioned. You could take the path back into individual contributor if you feel like. Yeah, so this is the interesting part. When we're developers, and I'm not speaking completely in general, but when we're developers, we really like development. We really do enjoy the analytical aspect of things, the maximizing and optimization of code, and the delivery of these incredible products that we work on. But we're told to make an impact, we need to be leaders. So I always refer to Colin's speech before, because it makes a lot of sense. You feel that, okay, to make an impact, you need to be in leadership. To be in leadership, you need to go into a leadership position. Leadership position is management. That was from engineering starting probably in the 50s or 60s all the way until like mid-2010s. In the mid-2010s, there was a little bit of a shift. A lot of companies realized that they have a lot of senior engineers. And those senior engineers were not interested in management. They didn't want teams. They didn't want to deal with teams. They did not want to deal with anything related to, one-on-ones or hiring or anything of that. They wanted to deal with product. They wanted to deal with architecture. They wanted to deal with the technical problems at hand. At that time, there was a title called software architect. That, like, early 2010s, like even 2007 and a little bit higher, that's when software architect became a very popular title. That's what I wanted to do. And I really wasn't concerned with management. I just did not want to deal with that. I think, like, a lot of us just don't want to deal with, like, budgets and hiring and all of that crap. We just want to deal with really cool software. So at xe.com, my thought was, I'm not gonna care about, one-on-ones or any of that. I'm just gonna try to build an architecture. And then I'm going to present myself as a good candidate for a software architect. xe.com was fairly small when I started. It was about 12 developers. But by the time I was a senior developer, it was about 53 engineers. So at that moment, I was thinking, cool, I can just keep going with the individual contributor. When I moved to Vidyard, Vidyard was a little bit bigger. It was about 75 engineers, 85 engineers. At that moment, you feel that you're not the big fish in the pond anymore. There's a lot more contribution. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna tone down that ambition and actually get more experience. And that's something that we actually don't see. When we stay in a company for a while, we feel like we know everything, and therefore that we have the right to actually get bigger and bigger titles. But then as soon as you move to another company, you realize, okay, I only know 10% of what I really know. And that happens with experience. So how did I end up being in management? Well, after Vidyard, I moved into Imagine, and the manager at the time thought I would make a good team lead. Now, a team lead is a little bit of a different role than a manager. A team lead, you are working and collaborating with other people, but they don't answer to you. You can't hire or fire them. At least that's the conventional sense of team lead. Depends, if you're in a startup, you're probably team lead, CTO, manager, whatever the hell, even the janitor, it doesn't matter. But the conventional sense is that you are the technical lead on collaboration. You have a lot of sway in technical manners. You have a lot of sway in how to influence people's decisions, but you're not hiring and firing them, so there's no pressure there. Imagine got acquired by Innovyze. Innovyze had a different approach of things. They actually had explicit designations where they would have principal engineers, and then they had the managers. But because Imagine has such a big impact on Innovyze, the management from Innovyze allowed for a title called technical manager, because they still wanted people to lead people, but they didn't want to disturb the fact that those are also good technical contributors. So I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. What, another hat on my head? That's really, and you have to be aware of that, but this is part of the things that I've actually gained as experience. From that point, I realized that I'm actually really good at communicating the problem, and I'm good at smoothing those rough edges that come from immediately communicating with developers who really want to focus on the technical aspect, and they don't want to deal with, the people side of things. We have to respect people's personalities, right? So I was able to smoothen that path, and I enjoyed that. And I actually enjoyed what Colin mentions is an implied success, as in when your team succeeds, you would succeed. And I felt that kind of rush that you would get from your team achieving such crazy things is a good thing for me. So that's another point that you have to be aware of as you get more experience, is know what is really comfortable for you, what gives you the rush. It doesn't matter if you're the director of a company and if that makes sense, or if you're the principal engineer in a company, if that makes you happy, that should be the thing that you should be comfortable with. So when I switched to Freshbooks, they made up another title, engineering lead. But by the way, it wasn't just for me. They were hiring a couple of individuals that were good leaders, but also very good technically. And that brings me into explaining how the paths could be. Before I do that, let me explain a couple of things, by the way. Management is not an easy thing. So in the 2010s, that revolution of the title between individual contributor and manager, a lot of companies had to make sure that when they hire managers, they're actually hiring good managers instead of just people that end up with a power trip. Because that's very obvious that end up happening quite often. People wanted power to make their decisions and to achieve the plan that they wanted without really being concerned with being good managers. So Freshbooks was very aware of that, and the way that they approach management is incredibly empathetic. And you can see the list of things that they try to do to make sure that whoever they hire has a higher empathy than what we would assume, power to empathy ratio. Because sometimes you're like, I need to get something done versus I need to be empathetic of the people that are getting this thing done because I'm not physically doing it myself. I wonder if they should do it themselves, but yes. So it's very important. The other thing is I'm going to harken back on inclusion and making sure everyone's opinion is heard, because that's very central to being a manager. So what do I do in my everyday life, as an engineering lead, which is fairly managerial, by the way? Every day we're dealing with current problems. So you have to ask, what are the problems? Because sometimes developers will be inside their head. They're actually going to see problems that are bigger than what technically the business realizes what they are. Because they're closer to the ground, they understand how the software works. So they're going to tell you, things are going to fall apart. So you actually have to be very aware of that. That's why communication is very important. And then when you ask how we solve the problems, you really need to address the three different structures or three different paths of solving a problem, because software in any way is not something that is static. It's always changing. Goodness gracious, in FreshBooks, we have Ruby and we have Python, and someone wanted to introduce Go. That's just on the language part. Think about all the different tools that someone wants to introduce. So it's never static. And always, if you're going to go into management, don't think that if someone tells you, this will solve it, I'm like, not forever. Probably 6 months, and then things will break. And then make sure that you're building consensus. That's something that we forget. Saying our opinion or telling people what we want to happen is not something that is practical. It is, something that we all hate, which is authoritarian. A lot of developers are very anti-authority because they're intelligent human beings. It's something, part of the conversation that we've had earlier is when you hire really intelligent human beings, you need to give them the place to thrive in. So being authoritarian does not help. So build a consensus and a vision for that consensus. So once you get a common ground, once you have a common goal, try to deliver that way. Otherwise, you're just fighting a battle against your developers, and your developers are going to hate you and probably going to make a coup. You don't want a coup, not now. The last thing is, when you get consensus, action maps are very important, because you don't want to make it feel like to the developers there's no definition of done. As developers, we feel like we're always developing, whether it's like this tiny problem or this giant problem, you're always developing. So breaking it down into an action roadmap would allow the developers to feel their accomplishments. You would break it down to the point that they actually are going to sense, okay, version 1.x is done. I can actually take a break, you know? Mentally, I can like tone down instead of it's a grind of development. I'm always making a feature. That's very, very important, by the way. And in modern metric analysis, you know, like velocity metrics and things like that, it becomes very important because that's how you measure the company's progress. When you break it down to small pieces, it feels like the company is actually moving forward. If you don't, you're back to waterfall, and we're back to like 1970s where a bridge takes 17 years to build. Not a good idea. In management, we've made it solid. It's static what the path is, right? We know that, like, you go from manager to senior manager to director. It's a very static path. We know how it goes. But the exciting thing is in the individual contributor and in some of the hybrid positions. So in the individual contributor, the last 3 years, yeah, like even just since COVID, the idea of a staff engineer and a principal engineer really sprung up. And the reason why like those titles has sprung up is because we talked about it earlier. Senior engineers became more and more senior, and they want to impact the product, but they don't want to impact, you know, the business discussion of things, right? In the individual contributor path, it has become a lot more important than actually the management path. And it's very interesting because developers always thought like management is the path you want to go to. And the scary part of it, there's multiple articles that when developers are being promoted to managers, it's a promotion to failure. There's a couple of really interesting blogs about it where the title is promotion to failure because you get promoted higher and higher and higher until you can't do your job and you're basically a bad person in that position, which is not fair, right? Like developers, as they get more experience, they're actually probably a treasure trove of information and knowledge and experience, and you shouldn't basically set them up to fail by promoting them upward where they're less contributing, because as soon as you move away into management, you're not going to code. You're lucky if you can write 3 lines of code a month. And if you do that, I'm really impressed. But, I mean, yeah, it's very realistic that you don't. So Freshbooks and other companies devised this path where they're like, okay, we really like that you could be an individual contributor, but you're good at playing the team game. Let's introduce like the engineering lead title, which is like a hybrid, right? And that's actually a really good position to be in if you're not sure if you want to be a manager. You want to lead people, you want to also manage their paths, you want to work with them, you want to encourage them, you want to set up an environment for them, but you're not sure if you want to take that on fully. Technical leads or engineering leads are normally where you want to be in. You dip your toes in. If you don't like it, you can go back to individual contributor, and it's a good hybrid path. And then if you really like it, then you can go toward the management path, and you can, do your thing where you're dealing with budgets every day. I'm not knocking Colin's position. I know what that position is. Not a fun thing. You notice that I've been in the industry for a little bit of a while, and from what I learned from being a manager is something very, very important. Coming to it as a developer, I think it's very important to respect your team. You're not better than your team. You just probably have more experience than your team, but you're not better than your team. They probably also know more about the software than you would, so you need to give them that space of expressing their opinions. Secondly, patience is a virtue for a reason. It allows the ideas to percolate. It allows progress to show. Being impatient might become unsympathetic, and also will develop a tension between you, your team members, your cross team, your other managers. That is not a good thing. And the bigger your company is, actually the more difficult change would occur, and therefore the more patience you need. So just be wary of that. Take a deep breath whenever you're stressed about timelines. And when you are talking about timelines, be realistic. Try to address the gaps. So when you are, managing upward, which is when you're talking to your director, when you're talking to your VP, you're talking about the timelines in an incredibly realistic way. Otherwise, they're just going to think that is just easy to do, which is not. Because sometimes we skip testing. So, if everything goes well and testing passes and, I put my leg up this way and then I swing my hand that way and everything works out, it's never going to work out. Give yourself some time, So there are a lot of books and a lot of literature about how much padding you need to give yourself when it comes to timelines and deadlines. And when you're a manager, you really need to, because you're managing individuals. You're not, working on the piece of software yourself. The advice for being flexible early and being assertive late is something that I learned from my boss, in which that when you're having discussions about solving an issue, allow all the different solutions to come in. Let people actually even try them if they could in a minimal amount of time. So someone says like, oh, I would like to try out hooking the database using this kind of library. Cool, if you can spend a day on it to do it, no harm done. As soon as you hit an obstacle, let's try to approach it in a more standardized approach. That way, they feel like you're including them, and then they also feel that there is a timeline that they need to commit to. Being assertive late is actually something they would like, because they want definition of done. You need to get to the point of saying, there's a decision that needs to happen, and this is where you need to make the decision. Shielding your team is very important, because the friction that is between the people that are doing the things that need to happen and between the people that need to answer to the business's requirements, which is VPs, directors, CTOs, are completely differently prioritized. The CTOs want to deploy the features tomorrow. The developers want to do it in the best possible way. The reason I said best, because best could be by a different definition, whether it's fastest, most technologically appropriate, safest way possible, depending on your industry. So you need to be that layer of interaction between upper management and your workers. I'm gonna skip the second last one, but the last one is very important. Killing your biases is something in this modern world is very tough to do, because we are in a global world where we have different cultures, different opinions, a variety of wonderful minds. You need to, as soon as a thought comes to your head of dismissing an opinion, you basically bury that thought, because let that opinion, flourish and see where it goes. It might surprise you, like a young female graduate, woman graduate, that's 23-year-old, the first thought would be like, doesn't have experience. No, listen, just wait and listen. Kill that bias, right? A person who might have difficulty communicating in English, just wait and listen. Let the person give their opinion. It's very valuable. And it's very tough to kill biases, by the way. It's very, very tough, because even people growing in, like us, in a fairly thriving immigrant culture, it's very tough to do still. Okay, this is the promo slide. So, Freshbooks is hiring remote. This is something that has happened with a lot of major companies. They've realized that there is incredible potential everywhere. And Canada, from West Coast to East Coast, is just full of potential. And I moved all the way from Ontario to Nova Scotia because I believe that, you don't need to stick into the GTA where everything is there. I think we need to expand. We need to make sure that we address all the incredible people everywhere in Canada. So Freshbooks is hiring a lot. All of these positions are remote. We're office optional, as in like, if you want to go to an office, if you want, I don't know why, but sure, go in office. And we have been incredible at trying to make sure we modernize our approach to promotion. Freshbooks' approach to promotion is something that first time I see it, which is incredibly democratic, where the person's promotion first gets communicated to all the managers, and all the managers discuss the promotion. It is not like, this is my favorite person, you promote them. It's more like, did that person impact your company? That is something that I've seen only once in my previous experience, but I think that modern companies have been moving toward that, and I think that's a very sound approach. Thank you very much. Really appreciate this opportunity. It's been a pleasure.